Welcome back to the channel. We're playing 20 questions with.
David Parker, otherwise known as Figboot on pens.
Yeah. And you review a whole lot of pens. So
Yes,
it'll be
I think,
interesting.
yeah, I think at last count, it was up in the 700s or something like that, or at least the number of videos. It's somewhere around there. So quite a few.
All right, let's get into the questions. When I say fountain pen, what pen do you think of?
I tend to think of a Sailor King of Pen Pro Gear Sky. It's one of my favorite pens, and it has some really good memories associated to it. It was a limited edition that's no longer available. I purchased it while I was on a trip to New York, and I took a trip to the fountain pen hospital, and I thought that this pen was sold out because it had been available for a while, and it wasn't available anywhere. And I looked down in their display counter and they had one left, and it happened to be a medium nib that I wanted, and so I thought that was fate, and so I purchased it, and it's just one of my favorite pens. I love the size, I love the color, and love just about everything about it.
That's fantastic. How did you get into pens?
I had a friend at work that enabled me slightly because he was not really into pens, but he had a pen. He had a Lamy Safari, or maybe I think it was an All Star. And just one day he said, "Here, do you want to try out this pen? You might like it." And I had never tried a fountain pen before, and I thought it was cool and unique. And so then I went up to the one website he told me about, and I purchased one, and I purchased my very first pen, which was this Lamy All Star in silver. And so, that was kind of how I got started. And like I said, he really wasn't into pens. He just had one and thought I would be interested. And then obviously I took it a little bit farther than he did. But I appreciated the fact that he introduced me to a new hobby very gently. It wasn't like he was trying to push it on me, but it was a nice suggestion.
Well, you've answered question number 3 that your first pen was a Lamy.
Yes,
What's
this
your
Lamy
current?
All Star, which actually had a fine nib, which I really don't care for that much, and so I learned that my preferences lied elsewhere in regard to nibs, but it was a very good starter pen.
What's your current daily driver?
My current daily driver is a Visconti Voyager Del Mar, which was my most recent collaboration with Visconti, and I'm a little biased, but I'm really enjoying the way this pen turned out. This is a custom Jonathan Brooks resin that he and I worked on. Well, when I say he and I, it was more me suggesting things and he did all the work. He's the artistic talent. But I was really pleased with the way this turned out. And that I've been pleased with all of my projects that I've done in collaborations, but this was one of those brands that I would have never thought, at least when I first started this, that I'd be able to, get my logo. I know it's hard to see here, but my logo on a Visconti pen. And the folks that have purchased them have really enjoyed them. I still have a few available on my website, but they are limited edition and they won't be around for much longer. But yeah, I've been using this. Well, I tend to mix things up a bit and use different pens. This is the one that I've kind of kept inked for a while because not only is it my own, but I'm really pleased with the way it performs as well and enjoy it.
Yeah, I haven't collaborated on any pens, but I've done a couple paint sets with small makers, and it is a really cool feeling to use something that you were part of the process of creating.
Yes, it is. It's just a fun thing to, also it's fun to see other people get excited about
Yeah,
something that you had a hand. It's like, okay, being a good salesperson is someone who can transfer emotion. And that it's fun when you see people get excited over new pen day, but then it's even more fun when it's something you had a hand in creating and that you're proud of.
yeah.
And when you see other people get excited about it, then that just accentuates the joy in that because it's not just a business venture. I want to try to help create cool things that other people might like as well, besides myself.
What's your favorite ink?
I would say it's Pilot Iroshizuku Konpeki. That's
Okay.
my favorite ink. Um, and that I just think it's a nice solid blue. It's professional enough where you could use it on just about anything, but it has some vibrance to it. So it has a little bit of flair, but yeah, I'm almost through my third bottle of this. I know it's hard to see exactly where it is as I'm moving it around, but there's maybe only a quarter left in this one, and I I might have only drained one other bottle of ink, but I've gone through three bottles of Konpeki, so I use that one quite often.
What's your favorite brand of either pens or ink?
For pens, I would say Pilot. I think that they have a good variety to where they have some great beginner pens, and then each step along the way, they have some amazing offerings. And I would even take that up and uh, kind of shoehorn in Namiki on top of that. Some of the Namiki pens that I have are amazing and perform really nicely as well. And so I think overall, as far as quality and consistency and looks, I really enjoy the Pilot pens.
All right, modern or vintage?
I'm more modern. The vintage bug hasn't bit me. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just a personal preference, and it, it doesn't necessarily feel like it connects with me. But then, who knows? 20 years from now, all these modern pens are going to be vintage pens, and so maybe at that point in time, I'll have to consider myself into vintage when all the things I'm into right now are quote unquote vintage.
You're the first person to give that answer, but it is very true.
Yeah, I mean, because if you were, let's say you're older, let's say you're in your 70s or 80s, some of these older pens that we consider vintage, well, that's just what you grew up with, and that's in a way that's your modern. So yeah, I'm looking forward to seeing what comes out in the future though as well.
Yep. Do you swatch all your inks?
Yes, I do. Mainly for review purposes, because then whenever I use an ink, I like to have comparisons. And so I have this cabinet that you see right over here. Well, there's another one right next to it,
Yeah.
but this one is just full of like supplies, but the one next to it is completely full of ink. And so I have swatched every single one so that I can have comparisons uh, and be able to know what I have. So yes, I have painstakingly done. Well, I didn't do it all at once. It was done, as I collected them. I do them as it goes along.
All right. Are there any pens that you daily drive the same ink and pen combination, or do you always switch it up?
Now, there's certain pens that I will always ink with the same ink. Like I always put Konpeki in my Pro Gear Sky just because I think it's a really nice match. And there's certain other pens I use certain inks, but generally, I will try to mix it up. I try to mix up my pens to where I'm trying to rotate through my collection. I have a whole spreadsheet where I keep track of my collection, and so I keep track of what I use and keep track uh, of how long it's been since I have used a pen. So all of a sudden you look and it's been like a year and a half since you touched this one. That maybe it's time to put that in the rotation. And so I've gotten better. So I used to keep way too many pens inked, and that was
Yeah.
just terrible because then it would be like a year and I would pick up a pen and you're not going to be using that thing after a year. You're going to be spending a half hour cleaning it. So I have gotten significantly better at cleaning my pens as I go along. So I typically will clean them either every weekend. I try to use a different pen every day, and so each weekend or maybe every other weekend, I'm cleaning like 5 or 10 pens. And so then when they go back into the storage, then they are clean. So when I pull it out, I just ink it up and then go. So I'm not having to worry about um, it not working or having to clean it, and it's pretty much good to go. Except for there are a couple I keep inked constantly. That there's some pens that do a good job staying inked all the time, and there's usually not a problem with those. But that's what I end up doing to kind of rotate through my collection and not keep ink in there for too long.
So, is there with your spreadsheet? Is there any point, like if you don't use a pen for 2 years, that you might go, okay, maybe it's time to pass this along, or do you just then decide to put it in your rotation?
Now, that's the overall size of a collection is something that I've wrestled with, because I enjoy having the library,
Yeah.
so that when I do reviews, I can, if it's a review of a TWSBI, then I can pull out 5 other TWSBIs to compare it to, or something like that. Even though I might not be using those on a regular basis, I still have them as the library. And there's a benefit to that. But then I am keeping track, and when I could see that there's a pen that I haven't used in 5 years, chances are that means if it's not in my collection, I'm probably not going to miss it. And so I debate that, because in my spreadsheet, it does show how many days it has been since I have used every single pen in my collection. And, and they rotate up so that I have a list. And so then when I go to use them, I kind of go to the ones that I haven't used for the longest. But then there's kind of a group I kind of skip up at the top that it's like, okay, maybe not this time. So one of these days I will do a major purge, and the ones that are at the top of that list are probably ones that will get purged, and I won't miss that much. But I do, I'm a data analyst in real life, and so making spreadsheets and reports is kind of what I do for a living, and so it's kind of natural that I create something like that for fountain pens as well. I actually have a couple of videos on my spreadsheet, and I actually made it available to download. So I know there's lots of different tools that people use, and it might not work for everybody, but if someone is into Excel and enjoys that, then it's called the EDC fountain pen log. If you look on my channel, you can see a video, and there's links where you can.
I'll find the link for it and leave it in the links for this video.
So it's one of those things that if you're used to using Excel and enjoy that, it's even I even made it simple so that people can, if you know what you're doing with Excel, feel free to crack it open and adjust it to your needs. It's not like I've hidden a bunch of things and locked it down. It's basically open. We'll call it open source.
Fair enough. That wasn't a 20 questions question. Just as soon as you said it told you how many days, I went, oh, I have to know this.
No.
Is
no
there
problem.
a cutoff point?
No. The numbers keep going up on certain pens.
Do you keep your nib writing samples from videos so that you can look back and see how every nib writes?
I do keep them, but I keep them I actually give them away. So if I've always said that if someone writes me a letter, then I leave it in my PO box underneath every one of my videos, and I say if you take the time to write me a letter, then I will write you back. And that typically, if someone is writing me for the first time, then when I send them a letter back, I'll include one of my writing samples from one of the reviews. It's just a little something. So it's just a little something. And I was thinking that if I was a fan of a channel and took the effort to write a letter, then it would be kind of a neat thing to receive, especially if it was from a specific video that then you could literally go online and see. And so it was kind of one of those things where I thought it would be nice, and it's not costing me any money to then give those away, as opposed to throwing them away or something like that. It could be something a little fun for someone to receive. Maybe they're throwing it away, I don't know, but at least it's a little something to give away.
Well, it's a fun idea. What's a pen you wish you could see in person?
You know what? I say right now it would be the Montegrappa Frankenstein. Okay. Because I'm working on trying to get my hands on one, and that's probably the reason why, is because I'm trying. Sometimes it could be a challenge to get your hands on some of the limited edition, more expensive models, and it comes in a whole diorama of the Dr. Frankenstein's laboratory and things like that. And it's not that I'm so enamored by the story, but the pen just looks cool, and I enjoy doing reviews of pens that tell a story and have a lot of details behind them. Like recently, I just reviewed one David Oscarson pen, which was the Art Nouveau, which I know it's very shiny, but
it is very shiny.
But there's a lot going on here. And same with, I have one more that I need to write a review of, which is the David Oscarson Tesla model. Okay. So I'm going to be working on that one. But those are fun because they're a lot to show, a lot of eye candy and interesting stories that you can and rabbit holes that you could go down and tell stories about. And I think that some of the like the Montegrappas and the like the great character series from Mont Blanc, that those pens have like tons of symbolism in them and lots of things that you can just lots of things that are interesting stories to tell. And I always like to tell stories. So if you could tell, the more stories you could tell, the more interesting it gets. Like I have one of my favorite pens is the Mont Blanc Hitchcock,
Okay.
and that for the longest time this was one of my Grail pens, and that I was ended up luckily able to get one. But something like that, a review of something like this, there's a lot of stuff to talk about, especially since I'm kind of a film nut, and Hitchcock was one of my favorite directors, and so it was like some things like that you almost have to curtail yourself, or else you're making a 45-minute long pen video that people aren't going to want to sit and watch for that long.
Well, some of these have been like 32 minutes, so pen nerds will watch stuff.
Yeah, it all depends. Yeah, it all depends on the content. So sometimes I'll look at a video and you're like, okay, are we really talking about this for 32 minutes for this one pen? And you're like, okay, we probably can get a little more concise and speed it up. And
That's when you put it in time and a half.
yes,
You
or
put it in
2x.
time.
If they talk real slow, you can get away with 2x.
Yeah.
So yes, I have done that many times.
What's your current grail?
You know what? I would say I really don't have a current Grail pen, and I'll say this just like a mild Grail, because for the longest time I really wanted this Mont Blanc Hitchcock pen, and this was a Grail pen of mine for a long time that I never thought I would get, and it was kind of by all definitions a Grail. It was very hard to obtain. You thought it was kind of out of reach, and then one, we'll say, kind of fell in my lap at a price I couldn't pass up. Brand new in the box. It was like, if I was ever going to get it, this is what I need to purchase this, because I'll never find one as cheap again. But I would say my current Grail is the accompanying ink. Now, I'm not a huge fan of it. It's an okay kind of blood red color, and it's an okay ink, but I always kind of just wanted the ink that went with the pen. And like Van Ness did actually come out with an ink a couple of years ago that was a partnership with Joey Feldman called Good Evening. And that one was meant to basically be a replica of the Mont Blanc Hitchcock ink. And so I have one that's kind of close. And so one of these days I would like to have a bottle of it. But when I have seen them on there, like $100. And I'm like, do I really need to buy a $100 bottle of ink? I'm not sure about that. So let's just say, like when I'm at a show, when I'm walking around, one of the things in my back of my mind is, okay, are there any inks? And maybe there's a bottle of Hitchcock that's tucked away in some little, you go to a table and sometimes there's just like some random ink box that has like random things in it.
Oh yeah, that's how I found the Sailor Gentle inks in the original bottles.
Yeah.
Like the 60 mils.
I am always looking for those at pen shows, going, okay, maybe there's a Hitchcock in here. And so I will say that's a Grail, just simply because that's the one thing I'll go to a show and I am trying to find. And one of these days I'll get a hold of one. But, like I said, I'm not looking to spend $100 on a bottle of ink that I probably will only use in one pen. But I would say that was my current Grail.
All right. What pen would you recommend to a beginner?
You know what? I'd say, anything with like a Yovo number 6, because for a lot of beginner pens, the nibs can be really different. A Lamy nib is going to be different than a Pilot Metro. This is different than a Kaweco, and so part of being, first starting off as a beginner is understanding your tastes and understanding what you like. And if you start with something like a Yovo number 6, then there is lots of things out there that use a number 6 and that will be fairly consistent. And so that you could determine, okay, what tipping size do I like? And that that, okay, if I like a broad Yovo number 6, then I'm probably going to like this custom pen, or just because I like the looks of it, I'm not concerned about the nib or how it's going to write, because I know that for the most part, these are using the same types of nibs, and that you're more likely to be making a good buying decision as opposed to having to experiment and maybe purchase something that you don't care for. So I'd say at least to start off with something that uses like a Yovo number 6, and then once you kind of have that down, then you can branch out from there to experiment.
Right. What ink would you recommend to a beginner?
You know what? I have had a few people that have bought their first pens and wanted to know what ink, and I've always recommended some Pilot Iroshizuku ink, mainly because, well, one, it's a good ink. And they have a number of different colors. Even if you don't like Konpeki, there's a number of really solid colors in the series. Plus, it's just one of the coolest looking bottles. It has kind of a high cool factor to it. I love the teardrop, and it just looks good sitting on a desk. It's solid, so if you accidentally drop it on a carpet, it's probably not going to break. And so if someone is just getting started for the first time, I'll usually point them in this direction. It's, it's not the cheapest ink, but it's not the most expensive. It's like $20, $25. I haven't bought one in a little bit, but it's right around there. And that it just kind of looks cool. So when it comes to pens, a lot of things are about kind of a cool factor and how I'm doing something kind of different. And having a neat looking bottle is just one more thing to kind of hook someone in, as opposed to just maybe a more bland looking bottle that's more about the ink. But this one's about the ink and the bottle that's cool.
Right. What advice do you have for somebody wanting to try out fountain pens who might be intimidated by them?
I'd say that you need to realize that this is an inherently inconvenient hobby. Uh, that there is a bit of maintenance and care that needs to be undertaken. So I can imagine many people, what they do is they buy their first pen and then they use it and they maybe like it and then they set it in a drawer, and then 6 or 7 months from now they open it up and it doesn't work, and then they get frustrated because they're like, oh, why is this? Why did I buy this? This isn't working right. It's no good. Well, there's a bit of, if you understand that, what you need to do in order to take care of and maintain your pens, it's especially if you only have one or two, it's not a lot, but there is some effort that goes into it. And if you do maintain your pens, then it can be much more enjoyable and less frustrating. And that it's something you could really get joy from because it's fun using fountain pens. And so I would just say make sure that you kind of understand that you have a commitment to, you have a responsibility in your pen, and you kind of need to buy into that responsibility. And if you do that, you're going to have a much better time at the hobby in general.
Yeah, I think it was Ian that described pens, specifically eyedroppers, as high maintenance pets.
Yeah, that's accurate. That their responsibilities, and you got to take care of them, or else they're going to misbehave.
Yep.
and train them correctly.
Yep. And treat them with respect.
Yes, absolutely.
What filling mechanism do you think is most interesting, regardless of if you like to use it or not?
I really like vacuum fillers and power fillers. I've always just thought those were kind of cool, especially a really good demonstrator. I think that's kind of to just be able to see the ink kind of suck up in it. Even though my Visconti is a power filler and I like that it's a power filler, but I kind of wish that there was a way to physically see the ink as it gets sucked up in there, just because it's nice to still see your ink. Mine particularly doesn't have an ink window in it, but
Okay.
I always like seeing the ink getting sucked up in there, and so I've always enjoyed the power fillers and the vacuum fillers. Like even for like one of my first ones, it might have been like a TWSBI VAC 700. I mean, that's just a cool pen and for a decent price, probably $65, $70. And so you can get, and then actually you can get some nice vacuum fillers now with some lesser expensive Asian made pens that perform very well as well. So you don't need to talk about high dollar pens just to get those cool filling systems. They're starting to be used more and more in the lower end pens as well, as far as a lower cost.
Yeah, lots of things aren't cartridge converter anymore, which is nice.
Yep.
What nib size do you prefer to write with?
For the longest time, I really stuck to mediums, and I've started to branch out more to broads. So it's mostly medium and broads. I typically don't do extra fine and fine as much, but I usually am living in that like medium and broad range.
Right? Is there a style of nib you love or find interesting but would never actually use?
The one that I've been interested more lately is an architect grind. I just reviewed a pen from Endless, which is a lower cost pen. I mean, when I say lower cost, it's like six. I think it was $65,
Yeah,
$60, something like
there's
that.
something like that.
And it had an amazing architect nib on it. And so again, you could go to a really, there's so many good nibsmiths out there who could actually do it and do it very well, but you could also find really interesting nibs on some lower cost pens as well. And the architect nib on that one was fantastic. And it's one of those nibs that when I tried it, it made me want to try it more. Sometimes stubs, I don't do it for me as much. They can be too finicky at times. Now I'm sure that there's better ones and worse ones, but for the most part, I haven't connected with stubs that much. But which on a pen, which is essentially the reverse of a stub, which is the Architect, the one especially the last one I used was amazing, and it added a lot of flair, a lot of flair to your writing when with very little effort, and you weren't having to write special with it. It was just you could pretty much write how you normally wrote, and your handwriting looked a lot better.
Yeah, no, I like my architect. Do you always use the same paper? If so, what paper?
I tend to. I have Rhodia 80-gram paper. This is the number 18. I have a tendency to use to use this here at home, and I'm testing inks. And then usually it's the top bound, and I fold it over like this.
Okay.
And then at work, I have a folio that I have one of these in. And then for my reviews, I usually have the one that's perforated at the top and the rolls. And so I use this same paper for my reviews as well.
All right.
So usually and then I would say I'm a big fan also of the 52-gram Tomoe River paper. So I have a lot of some. If I write letters, then that's typically what I'm using. The old recipe. I'm not against the new recipe, but I still have a bunch of old recipe Tomoe River paper that I'm using, and one day we'll run out and have to get the new recipe.
I've never used either, so
It's very nice.
yeah.
It's accommodating, and it just feels really nice as well, and it just feels like a cool piece, a cool paper that it's one of those things. Sometimes if you hand it to someone or someone got a letter with it, they'd be like, "Oh, this is neat," type of thing. Um, Also,
Yeah.
onion paper. I have a couple of sheets of onion paper that I've used recently that are neat as well.
Yep. Which also sounds super interesting, and then I go, I don't think I'd like it. Like I'm so boring in my paper choices. Um, what is your least favorite ink/ink color family?
Um, Okay, my least favorite bottle is the Sailor bottle. While I love their inks, I despise their bottles.
Like the square bottles or the old paper
No,
bottles?
let's see. Oh, this is hold on. These bottles. I hate these bottles
Oh,
because
so the old bottles.
yeah, because it does have the little cylinder in the middle, but it never works right. At least
No.
for me, it's very shallow. So if you have a big nib, it's very hard to use. Usually, I will have to we'll call them basically decant these if I really want to use it or put it in other bottles or physically take out the plastic piece inside. So while Sailor makes some great inks, I despise these bottles. So I'm not a fan of those bottles. As far as colors, I would say like olive green, I'm not quite into. And then also anything very light, whether it's a light blue or a light yellow or light red. I kind of prefer my inks to be more saturated as opposed to kind of light and airy. So I'm not a big fan of kind of lightly colored, lightly shaded inks.
Okay. Well, thanks for playing 20 questions.
Well, thanks for having me, Alexandra.